Good afternoon. I just want to come today and just talk a little bit about the age that we're in again and see where we're at and what we need to be doing. Most of us have heard the story of the little girl who was watching her mom make a ham. And the mom was cutting off the ends of the ham. And the little girl said, "Why do you cut the ends off the ham?" And mom said, "I don't know. Let's call Grandma." So they called Grandma, and Grandma said, "I don't know. Let me call my mom." So they called Great-Grandma. And when they asked Great-Grandma, "Why did you cut the ends off the ham?" she said, "Well, my pan was too small." So for years and generations, they've wasted a lot of good ham because the traditions have stayed small, but the pan had grown larger. And that's kind of where we're at now, is that our traditions are still the same size, but our pan's grown larger. And how do we deal with that? And so we need to understand the principles of where we're going so that we can grow with the pan. And I just kept feeling this urgency to instruct us and to press into this on how we're going into the new age. Keep our eyes open for how things are changing. Keep our eyes open for what's going on, not just with the church, but the world, because it's the whole thing. We need to understand, we all sense that something's changing, but what does that look like, and what do we need to do? So Isaiah 42, verse 9 says, "Behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things I declare. Before they spring forth, I will tell you." So God's always good about telling his secrets to the prophets. He's always good about telling us things before they spring forth. And that's when we're feeling that something's new happening and we're seeing that the Lord is telling us stuff, but we might not always understand everything. And so we need to just sometimes we just need to be still and regroup and think about it and pray about it before we move on. And I really feel like this is where we're at. When we build a big building, like when you go down and they're building a big skyscraper, the first thing they do is they have to dig down. And they dig down until they have a very firm foundation. And it seems like they're digging down forever. But that preparation that is very vital. The stronger the foundation is, the structure will be stronger. If you don't have that firm foundation, the structure won't stand. And so the Lord told me a long time ago, he said, dig the past to build the future. So we have to dig down through these layers and to see where we're at so that we can build from here. And that's kind of where I feel like we need to look at. In Matthew 13, verse 52, Jesus said to them, "Therefore every teacher instructed concerning the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who brings out of his treasure things new and old." We always want to bring forth the new, but sometimes we have to bring forth the old. We have to learn from the old so that we can understand the new. If we forget the past, we can't understand where we're going. So let's look a little bit about what happened in the past. And some of you have heard me teach this before, but to me is a vital again. We just need to really take some time to pay attention to where we're at. So we know that Genesis 1 started a new age. When God said in the beginning, and it's the age that I call the age of the patriarchs, because it's the patriarchs that we know. It's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It's Adam, Enoch, Noah. It's these mighty men of God that were in the first age. So from Adam, the first man, until Jacob, till the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes became established. This was the age of the patriarchs. And during this time, they offered sacrifices for themselves and their families. They didn't go to a priest. They did it for themselves. They did what was right in their own eyes. They established the traditions and the guidelines for living. And again, I'm going back to, it's not just the church. That's what happened in the biblical line. But in the world age, they were also establishing the guidelines. They were establishing what their beliefs were for living. I mean, if you look at during that time, you see the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah. You see Nimrod, the Tower of Babel. You see these times where they were searching out, what do they believe? Who were their gods? What was their way of living? who was going to rule over them. This was the age of the patriarchs. But during this time, most of the time, it was all about each man did what was right according to his own eyes. So then, at the end of that age, according to the word that God gave Abraham, the Israelites went into Egypt, and they were slaves there for 400 years at the end of the age of the patriarchs. And God had already told them that Abraham, your seed is going to go into a foreign land, and you'll be slaves for 400 years. And so after that time, here was Moses. And Moses came out, and the Israelites came out of Egypt. We know the story of out of Egypt. But when they went to Mount Sinai, Moses was given a set of laws, the 10 Commandments to start with, and then a whole set of laws on how to do the sacrifices. You have the tabernacle, you have the temple, you have all that. And now, men were not to sacrifice on their own. They were to bring their sacrifices to the priest. So now you have a priest that was a bridge between a man and God. They had a set of laws. Now God had prepared them for these laws when they were slaves. They had to learn instruction. But it was still a whole different setup. It was a whole different way. And we think, yeah, they had a list of do's and don'ts. That makes it a lot easier, but it really didn't. But if we look at it, during that time, the first part of that age of the law, they went into the promised land. And you read in the book of Judges where, they went after the gods of the land, and then God raised up a judge. And the judge, as long as the judge was alive, then they followed God. And then the judge would die. And then men would go after their own self again. And so for about 400 years, they still tried to live in the age of the patriarchs. In Judges 21:25, it says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. So even though they were now in a new age, they were still trying to live like they were in the first age. And it didn't work. But they still did that. So for 400 years, they weren't willing to come out of the old into the new. But then the kings came along. You have David and Solomon. That they firmed the law. Now, when the king wasn't following the law of God, the people didn't follow the law of God. But the law, whether in the world or in the biblical sense, they had a law to follow. And like again, we'll go back. It was not just the Bible account. It was also during the world, because during that time, kings and kingdoms were set up. During the age of the law, then you have the Medes that came up, the Persians, Babylonians. You have Nebuchadnezzar. Then it even goes into the Romans, and the Romans were ruling the earth when Jesus came. So during that time, the kings and kingdoms, all these kingdoms were being established, and so people started learning how to abide by the law of the land. Then Jesus came, and it began the age of the church. And Jesus fulfilled all the sacrifices of the law. He fulfilled the law, and now there was a new way of doing things, completely different. But they still didn't understand that. And for the first 70 years, the temple was still in place. First 40 years till 70 AD, the temple was still there, and even the church would go in. Peter, Paul, John, they would go to the temple every day. They would meet in the temple. They would participate in the sacrifices. In Acts 21, it talks about Paul going in and participating in sacrifices for these guys that had fulfilled their vows. So they were still doing the sacrifices. They were still participating even until the destruction of the temple. So 70 years after Jesus came, they were still trying to figure out, what does this new age mean? And so now we're coming into this next age, which is which I call the kingdom age. And we've crossed over the threshold, but now we're in the season where it's like, okay, what are we seeing? We feel that there's new things going on. We see that even in the world that there's an awakening taking place, that even the world sense that there's a change coming. We see the riots. We see the people bucking the system, trying to figure out where do we fit in to all of this, and in the church, in the church world, we see where it's like, well, we don't want to do just the tradition. There's almost a line being drawn between traditional. We just want to do like we've always done. And people are saying, well, we want to do what God's wanting us to do. Something's different. What does that different mean? And we see even through all the history that the greatest enemy to the new was always the old move. Every time we had a revival, the greatest ones the ones that would come against the revival were the ones that were participating in the previous revival. And so we're at this time, it's even a stronger time where we're going into a different age. Are we going to stay the way we've always stayed? Are we going to move into this new? Are we going to, how long is it going to take us to move? As soon as you cross over the threshold into the new age, everything is available. The bigger pan is there. The bigger area is there. But our traditions hold us back. The way that we used to do things hold us back. And yet we really don't know what the new looks like. Because in every one of the ages, it was a totally different setup. There's a foundation there, but it's still a whole new setup, a whole new way of worshiping, a whole new way of being. And so now we're at this new threshold, and it's a whole new way. So we as believers, we as the remnant, we as the ones who are searching for God's will, we have to keep our eyes open. We have to watch and see, what was the old and how is God going to change that for the new? What are we seeing even in the world that would correlate with what we're seeing in the church age? In the kingdom? We've talked about in at Spirit of Life, where we know that there's going to be times when the angels and the cloud of witnesses will be participating with us in the physical realm. That's happened a little bit in the past in this church age. You have pieces of history here and there where that's happened. But we know in this age it's going to be a regular occurrence. And we know that's what we're pressing into. Well, then if you look at what the world is seeing, all of a sudden the UFO thing has been released from the CIA. And they're talking about, well, we're going to have aliens walking among us with no problem. And what happened even in the days of Noah? The Nephilim walked on the earth and people didn't think about it. So we know that that's part of it. So how do we get from point A to point B? We keep our eyes open. We want to have the pure. We don't want to have the perverse. We know that whatever God does, the enemy is going to do is going to pervert it. There's going to be the pure and there's going to be the false. Jesus said in Matthew 24, said, if possible, even the elect will be drawn away. So we as the elect need to be on guard. We need to be sure that what we're following is God. We need to take time and set and fellowship with the Lord and find out, what are we supposed to be doing? What do you want this to look like? What do we need to do different? What do we need to do the same? What is that foundation that we have? Based on all the different past ages, what is the foundation that we have that we can build on and to go into this new age? And so I would admonish us to just take some time right now and pray into this, so it doesn't take us 70 years or it doesn't take us 400 years to go into this new, but we can go into it immediately and walk into the fullness of the kingdom and be kingdom people. Ephesians 5, I want to close with this. Ephesians 5, verses 15 through 17 says, look carefully then how you walk. Live purposefully and worthily and accurately, not as the unwise and witless, but as wise, sensible, intelligent people, making the very most of the time, buying up each opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be vague and thoughtless and foolish, but understanding and firmly grasping what the will of the Lord is. So we're no longer just to go here and there. We're no longer to be vague and thoughtless and say this, I want the goosebumps here, or I want to do this, or this is fun, or this is what I think that will please God. No, we have to walk circumspectly. We have to understand and be very, it says firmly grasping the will of God. So before we take a step, we know firmly what the will of the Lord is. And as we move into this age, we're going to see great signs and wonders and miracles and powers. And I'm looking forward to walking with that with each one of you this evening. God bless you.